Hey guys, welcome back to the Compass Games Learn to Play series. Today we welcome designer Brian Miller and developer Tim Phelps, who are going to teach us how to play Silent War 2.0. So let's get started. Over to you, Brian and Tim.
Greetings, my name is Brian Miller. I'm the designer of Silent War 2.0 as well as 1.0 and all the Silent War and Steel Wolves games that are available out there. I'm on tonight with Tim. Tim is going to be my developer. He's made a major contribution to the Silent War 2.1 rule set. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to go through a couple of turns with the 1932 scenario, or Eastwind Early, to talk a little bit about how the game is played. So Tim's going to walk us through the actual play, but I'm going to have some commentary as we go along with this exercise. So, Tim, I'm going to ask you to take it away and walk us through a couple of turns of the Eastwind Early. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Well, first of all, to get started, before we actually start the turns themselves, I was just going to cover a few basics about the game. Of course, this is the game map itself. A few key items to note here. We have submarine bases such as Pearl Harbor here, Dutch Harbor up north here, several of them across the map. There are also what's called operational areas or op areas. For example, the Hawaiian Islands here, the North Pacific. This is where the subs will actually be transiting and operating to and from. Each of these op areas contains what's called an area activity chart, which you see here, which basically determines when they're searching for contacts, what sort of contact they find, whether it be low density, high density, small convoy, task force, etc. And we'll show how that works when we get into the turns. These smaller areas here that point into an op area are called special mission zones, or SMZs. And these are used for various war events that can occur during the game, which will have you deploy submarines into one of those areas for some sort of special operation. Also, one thing I wanted to point out that's new in 2.0 in the op areas is some of them have different characteristics. For example, if we look here at the South China Sea 2 op area, you can see it's designated as shallow. So that's going to have some effects on gameplay. And then the Banda Sea and the Java Sea here down below are narrow op areas. And again, that will have a couple of different effects on the game. Each of the op areas are connected by one or more transit routes, which are these lines connecting them. So 2 op areas that are connected via a transit route are considered to be adjacent to each other. At the top of the map here, we have the date markers, which are basically used to keep track of the turns. Each turn in the game consists of 1 week. And so depending on the scenario you're playing, you'll set it to start in a certain week of a certain month of a certain year. And then as you progress through the game, you'll just advance it week by week until you reach the scenario end. Over to the left of this, markers for keeping track of the current war period. When you play the full campaign game, you'll actually progress through these 4 different war periods, and those have different effects on the game as you go through, one of which is determining the sort of a base ASW value for that period. The scenario we're playing will just be treated as if we're in war period 1 for the entire scenario. We're just doing the first couple turns anyway. Below that, we have the current torpedo level, which tracks the progression of the quality of the torpedoes throughout the course of the war. Of course, they start out very poor at a -2 value if you're playing the World War II scenarios, and can improve from there.
And for this scenario, I should point out, it's primarily the Mark 14 torpedo that had the issues. In the 1932 scenario that we're about to look at, it's the Mark 10, and that's why it starts at -1 and not -2. Go ahead, Tim.
Right. Thank you. Other than that, there's just a few copies of various charts and tables around the map so that you don't have to necessarily look them up. They have quick access here on the board itself. Over here is an area for tracking tonnage and number of ships sunk, as well as submarines that you've lost. So that's just used to track those quantities during the game. As far as the playing pieces go, main playing pieces are going to be your submarines themselves. The submarines have two sides. This is their patrol side. So when they're actually out patrolling, they'll be on the gray side here. Some various information, their name, nationality. This is their range value, the 3 in the circle there. Basically, they have to stay within that many op areas of a submarine base while they're operating. This is their endurance rating, which basically determines how long they can stay out on patrol. Their submarine class, crash dive rating, and then 3 set of numbers here, which represent their attack rating, 3 in this case, defense rating of 1, and a tactical rating of 2. If we flip this over, the other side is called their transit side. This is the side they'll be on when they're in a base or transiting out from the base or back to the base and not actually on patrol. Again, we have their range value on this side as well. They have a readiness rating here, which is used when determining how fast of a turnaround time they have when they get back to base. An entry date, W/S indicating war start, and then again their class. So that is the submarines. And then the other pieces we have are the ships themselves, our targets. These have various information on them, type of ship that it is, tonnage rating. Some of them are named. If you're using the IGN expansion, actually all of the ships will be named. An entry date here, and then defense rating of 6 in this case, and an ASW value. So that's just kind of a quick rundown of the various components of the game. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. One thing, whenever you start a scenario that you have to do to get things set up is you have to create what's called the war mix. There are cups that will be populated with different distribution of enemy ships that you'll be drawing from based on what sort of contact you find. That's all governed by this war mix table here. In our case, we're doing the 1932 campaign, so you can see there's no aircraft involved in this one, but this just gives you a breakdown for each of those draw cups, which of the ships or ship types go into each of those cups. And when you're playing the full campaign, you'll see that that distribution varies as you advance from war period to war period. So we have ours set up, like I said, for the 1932 campaign here. So we're going to go ahead and get going. So there is a sequence of play here that is followed for each turn. The first part of each turn is the strategic segment. In this scenario, as well as most of the scenarios, the strategic segment is skipped during the first turn of the scenario. So we will move right along to the RRR segment, which stands for Reinforcement Ready and Repair. So the first step of that is submarine reinforcement phase. Generally at the beginning, the first week of each month, you will get reinforcement submarines that come in, as well as some that are scheduled to be withdrawn for refit. And since we're starting in week 3 of April for this scenario, there are no reinforcements to worry about yet. So that moves us to the Ready Submarines phase. This phase is where you will go to each of your submarine bases, and any submarines that are in the pier side box will automatically move to Ready for Sea. Any that are in the broom box will roll against their readiness number in the upper right hand corner there to see if you roll equal to or less than that number. They will move directly to the Ready for Sea box. Otherwise, they'll be moved into the pier side box and will then be ready for sea the following week. For this scenario, all of our submarines at the bases start in the Ready for Sea box, other than those that are being repaired. So we don't actually have anything to do for that step. Next, we go to our submarine repair phase. So any submarines that are in a repair box, each base has 3 repair boxes. Depending on how badly damaged a returning submarine is, it will get placed in either Repair Box 3, Repair Box 2, or Repair Box 1. And during this repair phase, we have the opportunity to see if the submarine's damage condition has improved at all from repairs. So we'll do that for the S-33 here at Manila. You'll notice for Manila, you use the white numbers here in this submarine base display. So we need to roll a 5 or less for this submarine to come out of repair box 1 and move into the broom box. So we'll see what we get for that. And we rolled a 2. So they will advance into the broom box. And they'll be able to check next turn then to see if they're able to go out to see that turn or have to wait one more week. Do the same for the S-27 at Pearl Harbor. They're actually in repair box 3, which requires a roll of 4 or less to advance. Assuming they make it, they will then move into repair box 2. The following turn, they would need to roll a 6 or less to advance to repair box 1, and then an 8 or less to move to the broom box. Let's see if their condition improves. And we got a 0. So they will move to repair box 2. And that will conclude the repair phase. And then the final step of the R segment is the prep for operations phase. So each of the op areas have 2 sections. They have an operating section and a done section. At the beginning of each turn, all of your submarines are going to be in the done section. So for the prep for operations phase, it's simply a matter of moving them from the done section to the operating section. We actually don't have any submarines operating in op areas at the start of this scenario. We do have a couple that are in special mission zones, so we don't need to do anything for prep for operations there. So going back to the sequence of play, our next step is going to be the operations segment. This is where you'll be moving your submarines. Either submarines that are on patrol can conduct patrol movement to move from one op area to an adjacent op area. They will conduct search and contact if they're eligible for that, to try to see if they find any enemy ships. Assuming they do, they will conduct the combat phase. And then lastly, transit movement. So if you have submarines that are not on patrol yet, they will actually just skip straight to the transit movement phase and then move up to 2 op areas for that phase. So we are going to start. The beginning of this scenario dictates that the S-34, which starts in the Formosa Special Mission Zone, is not allowed to patrol and must immediately RTB, which is return to base, back to Manila. So because this Formosa SMZ points at both the South China Sea 1 op area and the East China Sea op area, we have our choice of where that movement begins from. We're going to choose to have them actually be moving from the South China Sea 1 area, since that's adjacent to our base. So they will simply move from the South China Sea 1 op area into the Manila base. Because that movement is directly into a base from an adjacent op area, there's no transit event check that's required for that. We'll see what those are in a moment here when we have some other submarines that will be subject to transit event checks. So because they are undamaged and in the base, they are able to just move directly to the broom box. We will send them back to there. And I'll point out during the operations segment, you perform each step of the operations segment for each sub individually. So you choose a submarine, they conduct patrol movement if they're eligible, they conduct search and contact if they're eligible, they conduct combat if eligible, and then transit movement if eligible. And then you move to the next submarine. So it's sub by sub, you conduct their entire operations at once. So we're going to move next to the S-37. They start the scenario in the Lingayen Gulf Special Mission Zone. And the special instructions for them is that They are allowed to patrol the first turn and then immediately voluntarily RTB back to Manila. And they are only allowed to contact task force results. So the first thing we're going to do with the S-37, they're not conducting any patrol movement. They're going to remain where they are. So then the next step is the search and contact phase. In order to perform search and contact, you're going to be rolling a die on this area activity chart for the op area. And when you're in a special mission zone, you use the connected op area for that. So we're going to roll a die, and depending on what we get, that's going to determine our density of our contact that we find. And we're going to say that they rolled a 5, which is going to correspond to a moderate density contact. Now, because they are operating in a special mission zone, you'll notice that in Rule 20.4 that any result that they achieve is actually upgraded one level. So because we achieved a moderate density result, that's actually going to be upgraded to high density. We'll then look at the contact table on the search and contact section, and we will roll a second die to see what type of contact it is, whether it's a small convoy, a large convoy, or a task force. And remember that we are only allowed to find task force results for this submarine. So they end up rolling a 2, which for War Period 1, we look at the top row here, is a small convoy. So because that's not a task force, they have to ignore that and treat it as if they found no contact. Now, because this submarine is operating in a special mission zone, they skip their endurance check and immediately perform a voluntary return to base. So we're going to flip them to their transit side, mark them with a voluntary RTB marker. And then again, just like the previous submarine, this SMZ is considered to be in the South China Sea 1 op area. So when they perform their RTB movement, they're just moving into an adjacent base. So no transit event check is required. And again, they are undamaged, so they will get sent directly to the broom box. All right, next we're going to be moving our submarines that are in Manila out to start patrolling next week. So to do that, the first thing we're going to do is just send them all out to the submarine base on the map. Okay, so now that we have the submarines in Manila out on the map here, we can start moving them out. You'll notice that for this scenario, several of these op areas are not available to use. I have them marked here with these area not in use designations. We are allowed to move through them, just no patrolling in those areas. So we're going to start here with the S-41. And because they're on transit side, they're not going to perform any patrol movement. They're not going to be doing search and contact. They're not going to be doing combat. So they'll just skip straight to the transit movement phase. They have a speed of 2 for transit movement indicated here. So we're going to have them move to the South China Sea 2 op area through the South China Sea 1 op area. So they'll move through South China Sea 1 to South China Sea 2. Now, because one or more of the areas they moved through or into contain red boxes for the current war period, this movement requires what's called a transit event check, which is in section 19.1. One of the key aspects of a transit event check is determining which op area is what's called the governing op area. And that's going to be the one that has the most red boxes in it. So you'll see that South China Sea 1 has 3 red boxes. South China Sea only has 2. So South China Sea 1 is the governing op area. So that's the one we're going to be rolling against. And also it means if we end up receiving an RTB result of any kind from the transit event, our movement is actually halted in this area and we aren't able to proceed to South China Sea 2. There are a number of dice roll modifiers that can be applied to this transit event check, which is denoted in that same section. In our case, the ones that apply is we'll have a -1 die roll modifier because we are on our transit side. And then we also have a +1 die roll modifier because we moved into or through or from a shallow op area. South China Sea 2 being shallow. So that's going to be a net die roll modifier of 0 for us. So the way the transit event check is performed is you roll a die, and if after applying the modifiers, if the die roll result is in one of these red box areas, so in our case a 7, 8, or 9, then you'll make a second roll on the transit event table to see what actually happened. So we're going to say that the S41 rolled a 7 for their first roll. So that is going to require another roll. We then have to make 2 more rolls on the transit event table. The first roll will determine which row is used, and then the second row will determine the result. Now, because we moved into a shallow op area, that also applies a +1 die roll modifier to both of these rolls. So the S41 rolls a 5, which gets modified to a 6. If we look under war period 1, that's going to put us on the 3 to 7 row. The second die roll is an 8, which gets modified to a 9, and they are spotted, engaged and damaged, and then forced to return to base. So as I mentioned earlier, because they received an RTB result on the transit event check, they're actually forced to stop in the governing op area. So they're actually stopped here and become damaged, spotted, and they receive an involuntary RTB. Now, involuntary RTB, unlike voluntary RTB, means that they will move in the following turn. So that's going to conclude their operations segment. They will be moved to the done section, and we'll move on to the next submarine. Next, we're going to have the S40 also attempt to transit move to the South China Sea 2 op area. So just like the previous one, the South China Sea 1 will be our governing op area. We have the same die roll modifiers in effect. So for the first roll, no die roll modifier, and the S40 is much luckier and they roll a 2. So there's no transit event check needed for them. They are actually going to, at the end of their transit movement, move to the done section, and they are going to flip to their patrol side so that they'll be able to patrol in this area on the next turn. Note that if I had left them on their transit event side, that would indicate that they're going to perform transit movement again the following turn and will not be able to patrol that turn. So you must flip them to their patrol side the turn prior to when you want them to patrol. Next, we are going to move the S39 along that same path into the South China Sea 2 op area. Their initial die roll for the transit event check is an 8, which, because that's a red box result in the governing op area, means that we need to roll again on the transit event table. Their next 2 rolls are a 9, which gets modified up to a 10. So that's going to put them on the 9 row. And the next roll is a 3, which gets modified to a 4, which results in a spotted result. So they have been spotted. And again, that will conclude their operations. They'll move to the done section, and they will flip to patrol side so that they can patrol on the next turn. Next, we're going to have the S38 perform a transit move into the South Philippine Sea through the North Philippine Sea. So this direction. Now in this case, because both op areas have the same number of red boxes, it's our choice as to which one we treat as the governing op area. So we're going to say that in this case that the South Philippine Sea is the governing op area. We are not moving through shallow waters this time. So the only die roll modifier that will be in effect is a -1 for being on transit event side. So only an 8 or a 9 would result in a transit event check. And they got a 0. So they arrived safely in the South Philippine Sea. They'll get moved to the done section and flip to patrol side. We're going to have the S-36 do the same thing. So again, we'll roll for their transit event check. They got a 5, which modified down becomes a 4. Not a red box, so they are safe as well. And we'll have them patrol their next turn. For the S-35, we're going to have them just move into the North Philippine Sea. So because they've only moved one op area, they get an additional -1 die roll modifier for performing what's called cautious transit movement. If you only move one op area, that's considered cautious transit. And so they will actually have a total die roll modifier of -2, -1 for being on transit side, and another -1 for performing cautious transit. So in this case, only a 9, and we rolled a 2, so they are safe. Again, move to the done section, flip to patrol side. We're going to have the S-32 follow suit. So again, transit event check with a -2 die roll modifier. They rolled a 1. S-31, same thing. They also rolled a 1. And the S-30, they rolled an 8. They came really close, but because of that -2 die roll modifier, that becomes a 6. They are also safe. For the S2, which is our last sub leaving Manila, we're going to do something that's probably not advisable, but I'm doing it to demonstrate a rule. We're going to also have them move into the North Philippine Sea. Now, because there are already 4 submarines in the North Philippine Sea op area, this is going to cause what's called congregating risk. Once you have more than 4 submarines in an op area, they are subject to congregating risk, and that's going to apply a +1 die roll modifier for each multiple of submarines over 4. For example, in this case, we have 5 now, so it's going to be a total of +1 die roll modifier for congregating risk. If there were 6 submarines, it would still just be +1, 7, and 8. Once you get to 9 submarines in an area, then you're subject to +2 die roll modifier. And then the same thing would happen when you get to 13, 17, if you're crazy enough to do that. It just keeps increasing that die roll modifier for congregating risk. So in our case, we've got -1 die roll modifier for being on transit side, -1 for being cautious transit, but then a +1 for congregating risk. So we're going to say that they rolled a 4 for that. So they arrived safely in the North Philippine Sea as well. Next, we're going to move out the submarines from Pearl Harbor. So we'll send them out onto the map. In this case, we're just looking at getting closer to areas that we can patrol. You'll notice that transfer route, the Marshall Islands, the Hawaiian Islands, North Pacific, Solomons, all of the areas that these submarines can reach are not available for patrol in this scenario. So we're just going to be moving them out closer to areas that they can patrol. We have a total of 9 submarines here. So what I would do is send them up to the North Pacific. We'll start with the S-44 going to the North Pacific. For their transit event check, again, the Hawaiian Islands is going to be the governing op area because it has more red boxes. They have a -1 die roll modifier for being on transit side. We'll roll to see if anything happens to them. They rolled an 8, which is modified to a 7. So they do have to make additional rolls for the transit event. So the first roll is a 1, which will put them on the first row of the transit event table. The second roll is a 6, which is no event. After they move into the North Pacific, we'll move them down to the done section. Since they're one op area away from a couple places that they can patrol next turn, we'll go ahead and have them flip to their patrol side, and they will be able to conduct patrol movement either into the Bonans or the Kuril Islands for the next turn. For the S-28, we will have them move through the transfer route, since it has fewer red boxes than the Hawaiian Islands, into the Marshall Islands op area. Again, -1 die roll modifier for the transit event check. So anything but a 9 is what we're looking for. We got an 8. Again, they can patrol from there next turn. Same for the S-26. They roll a 2 for their transit event check, so they arrive safely. The S-23 rolls a 3. They arrive safely. And then these last 3 we'll send down to the Solomons, again through the transfer route. Same situation, -1 DRM, so only a 9 will cause potential issues. They get a 3. They'll patrol from there next turn. S-18, the same. They roll a 4. And the S-1 rolls a 6. So they all arrive safely. And that will conclude the operations segment for turn 1. So referring back to the sequence of play, we now move to the end turn segment. There are no weather systems on the map, so there's nothing to do for that in the conclude turn phase. We do get to check to see if any of our spotted markers are removed. We do have a couple submarines that were spotted. The S-41, if you roll between a 0 and a 6, they're able to remove their spotted marker. So we'll see if they're able to. They rolled a 7, so they are not. And then the S-39 is spotted as well. I actually want them to remain spotted, so we're going to say that they rolled a 9 and are also not able to remove their spotted marker. We then advance to the next week and are ready to begin the second turn. All right, so we're beginning the second turn of the game here, which is week 4 of April. Since we've already demonstrated the RRR segment, I'm not going to go through that again for this turn. What I would like to do is jump directly into the operations segment of turn 2 so we can start seeing how some actual patrols play out. But the first thing we're going to do for turn 2 is we have move everyone to their operating sections, which in Vassal is very nice because it's just a single button click. So now that we're starting turn 2, you'll notice back on the sequence of play that we do perform the strategic segment this time. And that starts off with the war event phase. For the war event, you roll a die. If that die is a 0 to 3, then there is going to be a war event for this turn. We're going to say that we rolled a 0 for that. And then we roll a second time on the war event table for the east wind early scenario. For the second die roll, we rolled a 1, which is special mission Japanese invasion of Guam. So we're going to be required to deploy 4 submarines to the Guam special mission zone, and only contacts of C2 or task force are going to be used. So we're going to have to send 4 of our submarines into this SMZ. So we're going to send the S-30, S-31, S-32, and S-35 into there to satisfy that war event. The next step of the strategic segment is the torpedo improvement phase. For this scenario, that's not possible until we've sunk at least 70 ships, as you can see on the torpedo improvement table. So we will then proceed to the intelligence and weather event phase. The first step is to perform an ultra roll. So we're going to roll a D10 on the intelligence table, and our die roll is a 3, which means that the South China Sea 2 and North Philippine Sea op areas will be ultra areas. We'll just grab a couple markers for those, and we'll explain what impact those have on the game when we get to operating the submarines in those areas. The last thing we do for the strategic segment is to roll to see if there is any new weather formations this turn. So we will consult the weather table. Because we're in the month of April, we will only have a new weather formation on a die roll of 0. And we did in fact roll a 0. We then make a second roll to see what area that tropical storm is located in. And in this case, we roll a 9. which means that it will be in the South Philippine Sea. That will conclude the strategic segment for turn 2. Since we've already gone through the RRR segment, I won't cover that again. I have already moved all of the submarines up to their operating section, so we are ready to go for the operations segment. So the first submarine that we're going to have conduct patrol is S-39 here in the South China Sea 2 area. So they are going to conduct search and contact. There are a couple of die roll modifiers that come into play here for that. First of all, they have a -1 die roll modifier for being spotted, but then they get a +1 die roll modifier because they are in an ultra area. So those will cancel each other out. So we're going to roll a die and look on the first row here of the area activity chart, see what kind of contact they find. They rolled a 6, which is going to be moderate density. And for the second roll, it is a C2 result, which you can see from the contact table. So we will look at the engagement table for War Period 1. For a moderate density, we will use this table here. A C2 result means that we will have 4 ships that we pull from Cup A, 3 ships from Cup B, 2 ships from Cup C, and 2 ships from Cup D. But in addition to that, because this is an ultra area, the other advantage that gives us is we get 1 additional ship for each of those columns. So I already have the combat display populated here with those ships. We'll bring the S-39 over onto the combat display. So the first thing we need to do for our combat is decide which column we want to set our submarine up in. Column A, which is all of the ships that we pulled from Cup A, are generally less dangerous. As you move further to the right, you start getting into more of the capital ships and more dangerous destroyers and whatnot. So we're going to start in column A for this combat. You'll notice that some of the ships on the back of their counters have a red ball insignia, whereas some have the IJN flag insignia. That generally means that these are more likely to be your merchants or your oilers or your non-warships, basically. Although that's not always 100% the case, there is a bit of a fog of war built in where sometimes a ship will present itself with a red ball on the back, but then it ends up being a destroyer or some other type of warship. So once we decide which column we want to set up in, then we need to choose an attack posture. You have a choice of either aggressive attack posture, standard attack posture, or cautious attack posture, which give you different advantages depending on the current situation. For this particular combat, we're going to be somewhat safe and choose a standard attack posture, which means that we don't have any modifications to the number of ships that we reveal or to our TDC markers, which determine how good of a solution we're able to get on our targets. So for standard attack posture, you're going to be revealing a number of ships equal to your tactical rating, which again is the number on the right-hand side here at the bottom of the counter. So we will choose to reveal these first 2 ships in column A. So our first one is a passenger ship. Second one is a gunboat. Once you've revealed your targets, the next step is to draw TDC markers, stands for Targeting Data Computer, and you draw a number of TDC markers, again, equal to your tactical rating. So in this case, we'll be drawing 2. So once you place your TDC markers, you can go ahead and reveal them. These are going to serve as basically either a hindrance or an assistance to your combat roll. So in order to determine if we're able to make an attack on either of these targets, we'll need to look at our submarine's total attack value compared against the target ship's total defense value. For the submarine, we add the attack factor of the submarine, in this case a 3, plus the current torpedo level, which in our case is -1. So that's actually going to take our attack value down to a 2. Let's say, for example, that we want to try to target this first ship. They have a defense value of 3, the first number there. We add to that the total ASW value of all revealed Japanese ships in our column and any adjacent column. In this case, that's 1/2. That would be rounded up to 1, which brings them up to 4. We then add the value of the TDC marker assigned to that ship, in this case 0. So we have our submarine attacking with 2 against a defense of 4. So that's not a valid solution, so we aren't able to make a shot against the passenger ship. For the gunboat, it's going to be an even worse situation. They have a defense of 1. The ASW value of 1/2, which is rounded up to 1, becomes 2, plus another 3 from the TDC. So their total defense value is 5. So because neither of these are valid targets, we don't have a possible solution. Because of that, there's not going to be any counterattack against us, which is mentioned in 14.17 subsection A. We now have the option to either withdraw or perform a reattack. We choose to reattack. In the reattack round, you are required to flip ships with an IJN flag on the back before you're able to flip any red ball ships. So because we're going to have to flip potentially 2 of these ships in column B, we're going to switch to a cautious attack posture. Between each attack round, you're allowed to switch postures, but you cannot switch more than 1 level unless your submarine has a super skipper. So because we went standard attack posture in the first round, we can switch either direction. So we're going to switch to cautious attack posture, which you'll see from the attack posture table. That means that we have to flip 1 fewer ship than we normally would. So instead of having to flip 2, we only need to flip 1, which will limit our exposure to potential ASW here. So we're going to choose to flip just this top ship. Oh, and it turns out to be a destroyer. And in fact, the special rules for this scenario dictate that the 6-3 destroyers in this scenario are actually treated as if they are diligent escorts. So we are going to pull an IJN ship to replace this with. So this turns out to be the DD Ushio. And I'm leaving this counter here next to it just to indicate that this is being treated as a diligent escort. When using the IJN rules, the diligent escort status ends up adding an additional 3 ASW to the ship's ASW value. So this is actually now a 5 ASW value diligent escort. However, because we are in cautious attack posture, this allows us to attempt to nullify the ship's diligent status. If we are able to roll higher than their ASW value, then they actually revert to just a normal destroyer. Unfortunately, we roll a 2, so they do maintain their diligent status, which means they are going to get to make an immediate counterattack against us using a special row on the counterattack table. Before that, we have an opportunity to crash dive. However, because we are operating in the South China Sea 2 area, which is shallow, that precludes the possibility of performing a crash dive. So the Ushio gets to make an immediate counterattack against us using the diligent escort row of the counterattack table. They also have some die roll modifiers in effect for that. A +1 because we are in a reattack round, a +1 because we are spotted, but then a -1 because we have cautious posture. So they end up rolling a 5, which after applying the DRMs becomes a 6, which is a spotted result. But since we are already spotted, it has no further effect on us. If we had received a damaged result, we could choose to abort the attack at this point and withdraw. But because we just got a spotted result, we're still committed to attacking. So we now draw and reveal 2 new TDC markers. So these are sent back. Okay, once those are placed and revealed, we can now see if we have a valid shot on either of these targets this time. I will note that because we're in the reattack round, each of these TDC markers are reduced by 1, with the exception that a -3 TDC marker still remains a -3. So this is still a -3. This one is actually a 0. However, because we've now got a total ASW value of 5 from the destroyer, plus another half from the gunboat, with our attack value of 3, which gets modified because of our torpedo level down to a 2, there's no way that we're going to have a possible shot on either of these again. Now this time though, even though we didn't attack in the first round and weren't able to attack in the re-attack round, there is still a counterattack, as you can see in 14.17 subsection B. So for the counterattack, we add the total revealed ASW value for ships in our column and any adjacent columns, which again is going to be 5.5. That rounds up to 6. And then we add the number of red boxes that are in the op area we are in, which is 2. And then also the general ASW value, which for this scenario is 0. We then subtract our defense value. However, because we're operating in shallow waters, that is reduced by 1. So we actually have a defense value of 0. So they're going to be rolling on the 8 row of the counterattack table. We roll a 7, which gets modified up to an 8 with our modifiers. That is going to be a sunk result unless our second die roll is between a 0 and 3. And unfortunately, we rolled a 9 for that. And so the S-39 is sunk. Okay, next we're going to be sending the S-30 into the Guam SMZ as part of our war event that we rolled for this turn. Because they're a submarine in an op area that's responding to an SMZ, they are not subject to congregating risk, as noted in section 20.2. They do, however, have to make a transit event check with a +2 modifier for moving into the SMZ. So they roll a 4 for that transit event, which is no event. So we will conduct search and contact with the S-30. Their first die roll is a 0, which with the +1 modifier becomes a 1 for the ultra area. So that's going to be a sparse contact. But again, because they're operating in an SMZ, that will get upgraded into a low density contact. Their second die roll is an 8, which is a task force result. The stipulations for the war event were that only C2 and task force results are allowed. So that is a valid contact. And again, because this is considered to be in the North Philippine Sea op area, they get the benefit of an additional ship in each column for the ultra area. So for a low density task force with an extra ship, they will have 2, 3, 3, and 4 for their columns. Okay, for this combat, we're going to set up in column A again. This time we're going to choose an aggressive attack posture, which means that we will be revealing 1 additional ship to our tactical rating, so a total of 3. So we're going to reveal these 3 red ball ships. Okay, we received a combat event. For this, we will need to roll on the combat event table, and we rolled a 6, which is a tonnage doubled event. So at the end of the combat phase, if we've sunk at least 1 merchant class ship, we will be able to double the tonnage of that ship. This gets returned to the cup. For our third ship that we reveal, we'll reveal this one here. And it's another merchant. Again, we choose 2 TDC markers. That does not change with the attack posture. It's always your tactical rating for that. Okay, so we'll reveal these. -3, very nice. And a -2. Because of our aggressive attack posture, we get to subtract 1 from each of these TDC markers, and that includes the -3 is able to go to a -4, unlike in a re-attack round bonus, which only affects everything but -3. So we have a -4 TDC for this ship, a -3 TDC for this ship. So for this attack, I'm going to demonstrate how you can perform what's referred to as a split shot. So we can divide our attack rating amongst multiple targets. So we're going to assign 2 of our 3 attack rating to this 4,000 ton merchant in our column, and the remaining 1 to the 3,000 ton merchant in the adjacent column. So for this first attack, we have the portion of our attack rating that's assigned to this ship, which is 2. We add in our torpedo value, which is -1, which gives us 1 for our attack value. For the defense value, the ship's defense is 2. There is no revealed ASW. And then we add the -4 TDC, which results in a -2 value for the defender. So our 1 plus a -2 gives us a 2-hit value of 3. And then because we're in aggressive posture, we get a -1 die roll modifier. So we roll a 3, which gets modified down to a 2, which is a hit. We then consult the attack results table, and we refer to the 1 to 4,000 tonnage row, which is the first row. We make a second die roll that's modified by our current torpedo value, which again is -1. We roll a 7, which is modified down to a 6, and that results in a sunk result. So we have sunk this ship for a total of 4,000 tons. Then for our second attack, again, we allocated 1 attack factor to this ship. Adding our torpedo level of -1 gives us a base value of 0. The defender has a value of 1, plus -3 for the TDC, plus 1 for being in an adjacent column. So that gives them a total defense value of -1. So we subtract their -1 from our 0 to obtain a 2-hit value of 1. And again, we have a -1 DRM for our aggressive posture. We roll a 0, which results in a hit. And for the second roll is a 2, which gets modified down to a 1, which, consulting the attack results table again, results in the ship being damaged. So we will place a damaged marker on them. Remove our TDC markers. And now, because there is no revealed ASW value, there is no counterattack. So now we can choose to withdraw or perform a reattack. We're going to push our luck here and perform a reattack. For the reattack round, you're allowed to reposition your submarine to an adjacent column. So we're going to slide over here to column B. And we will also switch back to standard attack posture. If we remain at aggressive, we would have to reveal all 3 of these IJN ships.
This is also a good point to point out that column A is not adjacent to D. You can't go A to D. You can only go A
Correct.
to B or B to C or C to D.
Right. Yeah, the adjacency does not wrap around. Okay, since we are back to standard attack posture, we just need to reveal 2 ships now. We're going to reveal this one, a battleship, and this one. Okay, and a destroyer. So these ships will get replaced with IJN equivalents. Once we have our ships replaced with their IJN counterparts, because we have a battleship that was revealed, we need to consult section 30.1 in the scenario book for the IJN battleship doctrine, which normally says that any battleships other than the Congo class, which are the 32,000 ton, and the Yamato class, 68,000 ton, can only appear in the Empire Pacific, Sea of Japan, and East China Sea, an additional location, North Philippine Sea, during War Period 3. However, for this scenario, there's an alteration to that also allows battleships to be found in the North Philippine Sea and the South China Sea 1 op areas. So because we're operating out of the North Philippine Sea, we are allowed to encounter this battleship here. Otherwise, they would need to be returned and another ship revealed in their place. All right, so for our reattack, we will again get 2 TDC markers. In this case, I chose to place one of the TDC markers on an unrevealed target. This target will be treated as if it has a defense value of 1, unless we decide to target it, at which point it would be revealed and we'll find out what its actual defense value is. All right, so I think our best option here is to go after the damaged merchant. So we will send our full 3 attack against it this time. So again, that will get modified by our torpedo value of -1 for a net attack of 2. The target ship has a defense of 1 plus -3. Remember, this is modified down by 1 for the reattack round. But then they also get a -1 for being damaged. So their total defense value is -3. So our attack value of 2 plus their defense value of -3 results in a target number of 5. And we end up rolling a 3, which is a hit. And then for our attack results roll, we also roll a 3, which is modified down to a 2, which is a damaged result. So if a Japanese ship receives a second damaged result, it is considered sunk. So we have also sunk this 3,000-ton merchant. And then if you recall, we had the tonnage doubled event in effect for this combat. So that first 4,000-ton ship actually counts as 8,000 tons. So the S-30 has sunk a total of 11,000 tons for this. Now we get to see if they manage to slip away or not. There is going to be a counterattack since we have the destroyer in play now. So again, the counterattack will be calculated using the total revealed ASW value, which is 1/2, which rounds up to 1. There are 3 red boxes for the op area that we are operating out of, become a 4, and then 0 for the general ASW value. We have a defense value of 2, which means when we consult the counterattack table, we will be looking at the 1 to 2 row, and we have a +1 modifier in effect because it is the reattack round. We roll a 6, which is modified to a 7, and we manage to just slip away undetected. We will return them to their SMZ. Clean off our counters here. And now because the S-30 is operating in a special mission zone, they will skip their endurance check and immediately voluntarily RTB back to Manila. Again, adjacent to the North Philippine Sea, so no transit event check needed for that. And they will go back to the broom box.
So what you just saw covers the fundamental basics of how the game is played. Thanks very much to Tim Phelps, who's the developer and will be the developer on the next expansion kit, which will be a solo submarine expansion for this. The game is essentially, you can play it in a very short period of time with a single patrol, or you can go for some of the much longer, including the full World War II in the Pacific submarine campaign. Any questions, you can reach us. We're on Board Game Geek under Silent War 2.0 and Consim World, where we have the full Silent War. It doesn't matter, it's 1.0 and 2.0 together. We're really appreciative, particularly of Mo, for inviting us to do this activity. Tim, any final thoughts from you before we go?
Appreciate the opportunity to come on and show everyone what a great game this is.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much. Mo, thank you very much. We'll now turn it back over to you.